I'm Clara, and I'm 28. I discovered my brothers were making double my salary for doing half the work. And when I confronted HR about it, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "They're men, and you only spend money." So I quit on the spot, and he actually laughed. "Who's going to hire you?" he asked. "Well, Dad, turns out I didn't need anyone to hire me. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely undervalued by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how I got to that moment. Growing up in the Mitchell family meant understanding that competence spoke louder than any label. At least that's what I believed. Our family business, Mitchell and Associates, specialized in commercial property management. Dad built it from nothing, and I grew up thinking I'd be part of that legacy. I started working there right after college, eager to prove myself. While my brothers Jake and Ryan coasted through their business degrees, I graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in business administration and a minor in real estate. I thought merit mattered. How charmingly naive of me. From day one, I threw myself into everything. Crisis management, that was Clara's department. Difficult clients, send Clara. Impossible deadlines, Clara will figure it out. I became the company's unofficial firefighter, constantly putting out blazes that my brothers somehow never seemed to notice existed. Jake, who's 30, spent most of his time networking at expensive lunches that produced questionable results. Ryan, 26, had a gift for showing up late and leaving early while still managing to take credit for projects I completed. But hey, they had that magical Y chromosome working in their favor. I'd been there 6 years when Linda from accounting accidentally left a payroll report on the copy machine. I wasn't snooping, just making copies of client contracts. But there it was, staring back at me in black and white. Jake's salary, $95,000. Ryan's salary, $88,000. Mine, $42,000. For a moment, I thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe it was old information, or maybe the numbers were wrong. I stared at that paper until the figures burned into my retinas. $42,000 for managing the most difficult accounts, working weekends, and basically keeping the company running while my brothers played office. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not just the money, though, that stung enough. It was the realization that my own family had been systematically undervaluing me for years. Every compliment Dad gave about my work ethic, every acknowledgement of my contributions, had been hollow words while my brothers collected paychecks that reflected their true worth in his eyes. I spent the rest of that day in a fog, mechanically completing my tasks while my mind raced. By evening, I'd made my decision. This wasn't going to continue. I deserved an explanation, and I deserved better. The next morning, I marched into HR and asked for a meeting about compensation review, because surely this could all be resolved like adults. Surely my family valued fairness and would correct this obvious oversight once it was brought to their attention. God, I was still so naive. The HR meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I prepared like I was defending my dissertation, armed with performance reviews, client retention statistics, and a detailed breakdown of my responsibilities versus my brothers. I figured numbers don't lie, right? Well, apparently they do when your last name is on the building. Sandra from HR looked uncomfortable from the moment I sat down. She's worked for our family for 15 years, and I've always liked her. She's fair, professional, and has a reputation for handling sensitive issues with discretion. But today, she kept glancing toward Dad's office like she was waiting for backup. "Clara, I understand you have concerns about your compensation," she began carefully. "Concerns is putting it mildly," I replied, sliding my prepared documentation across her desk. "I'd like to understand the criteria being used for salary determination, because based on performance metrics, there seems to be a significant discrepancy." She barely glanced at my materials. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be the straightforward discussion I'd imagined. "I think this conversation would be better had with your father directly," she said, already reaching for her phone. "Let me see if he's available." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in Dad's office, watching him flip through my carefully prepared charts with the same expression he'd used to review a grocery list. Sandra sat beside me, nervously adjusting her notepad. "Clara, honey," Dad began in that patronizing tone he uses when he thinks I'm being emotional. "I appreciate your initiative here, but I'm not sure you understand how business compensation works." The honey did it. That casual dismissal, like I was a child asking why the sky is blue. "Enlighten me," I said evenly. He leaned back in his leather chair, the one behind the massive oak desk that was supposed to intimidate. "Your brothers have different responsibilities, different pressures. Jake handles our major institutional clients, and Ryan manages our development projects. Those roles carry more liability, more complexity." I blinked at him. "Dad, I handle Morrison Industries, Blackstone Properties, and the entire downtown portfolio. Combined, They represent 60% of our revenue. Yes, but... And last month, when Blackstone threatened to pull their contract over the heating system failures, who spent 3 straight days coordinating with contractors and city inspectors to resolve it? His jaw tightened slightly. I was disrupting his narrative. Clara, you're very good at operations, but leadership requires... Leadership? Jake spent 2 hours in a restaurant convincing Morrison's CFO to stay with us after Ryan missed 3 critical deadlines on their quarterly reports. I spent 2 hours actually fixing the problems Ryan created in the first place. The silence stretched between us. Sandra was staring at her notepad like the secrets of the universe were written there. Finally, Dad put down my documentation and looked at me directly. They're men, Clara, and you only spend money. Have you ever had a moment where time stops? Where words hit you so hard that reality shifts around you? This was mine. 6 years of dedication, excellence, and loyalty reduced to my gender and some twisted perception of my worth. Excuse me? I managed. Men have families to support. They need career growth, financial stability. You'll probably get married, have kids, want to stay home. It doesn't make sense to invest the same resources in someone who's temporary. Temporary. 6 years, and I was temporary. I stood up slowly, my legs somehow steady, despite feeling like my entire world was crumbling. I see. Now, Clara, don't get emotional about this. Business is business. Emotional. Of course, because recognizing blatant discrimination is just me being emotional. You're right, Dad. Business is business. I reached into my purse and pulled out my company credit card, office keys, and parking pass. Consider this my 2 weeks' notice. The color drained from his face. Clara, let's not be hasty. 2 weeks. Professional courtesy, since family clearly means something different to each of us. I placed my things on his desk with deliberate care. I'll finish the Morrison transition and brief whoever you assign to my accounts. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Who's going to hire you, Clara? Really? I turned back, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. Not as my father, not as my mentor, but as exactly what he was. A man who'd built his success by making others smaller. You know what, Dad? That's the wrong question. His eyebrows raised expectantly. The right question is, who's going to keep your clients happy when I'm gone? The laugh that followed me out of Dad's office was the sound that changed everything. Not angry, not bitter, but genuinely amused. Like I just told him the funniest joke he'd ever heard. That laugh echoed in my ears during the longest 2 weeks of my professional life. I've never been one for dramatic exits, though. Professional courtesy meant something to me, even when it clearly meant nothing to him. So I spent those 2 weeks meticulously documenting every process, every client preference, every potential issue that could arise after I left. Call it pride or call it spite, but I refused to let anyone say I left them unprepared. Jake was assigned to take over my accounts. The irony wasn't lost on me, watching him flip through my transition notes with growing panic in his eyes. Jesus, Clara, you really manage all of this? He asked, staring at the Morrison Industries file, which was approximately 3 inches thick with contracts, compliance documents, and relationship notes I'd built over 4 years. Every day, I replied pleasantly. Mrs. Morrison prefers email communication before 9 a.m., never calls during lunch, and has a severe allergy to excuses. She responds well to proactive solutions and detailed quarterly reports. Everything you need to know is in those notes. Ryan poked his head into my soon-to-be former office. So what's your plan? Got another job lined up? The question everyone kept asking, like the only conceivable path forward involved trading one boss for another. Something like that, I said, continuing to pack my personal items into boxes. What I didn't tell them was that I'd been thinking about this possibility for longer than I cared to admit. Not the discrimination part. That was a surprise that still made my chest tight with anger. But the independence part. The idea that maybe, just maybe, I could build something of my own. During those 2 weeks, I did my research. Business licenses, insurance requirements, startup costs. I'd saved aggressively for years, partly because I was naturally frugal and partly because I'd never had the salary to support expensive habits. Turns out, financial discipline was about to become my greatest asset. Fortunately, the family business had never bothered with formal employment contracts, just another sign of how they'd underestimated my potential to actually compete with them. On my last day, Dad called me into his office one final time. Clara, I've been thinking about our conversation, he began, and for a moment, something foolish inside me hoped for an apology. Maybe we can work something out. A small raise, perhaps? 10%? 10% of my criminally low salary. After discovering I was earning less than half what my brothers made for doing twice the work. That's generous, I said, and meant it in the most sarcastic way possible. But I've already made other arrangements. His expression shifted to concern. What kind of arrangements? The kind that value competence over chromosomes. I'd planned to leave quietly, but word had somehow spread through the office. Sandra from HR surprised me with a small farewell gathering in the conference room. Nothing elaborate, just cake and coffee, but the gesture meant more than she could have known. "We'll miss you," she said quietly as people filtered back to their desks. "This place won't be the same without you." I believed her. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because the work I did mattered. And everyone except my family seemed to understand that. My last task was dropping off my final reports at each client site. Professional relationships I'd built over years. Contracts I'd negotiated. Problems I'd solved. I wasn't burning bridges. I was closing chapters. Mrs. Morrison from Morrison Industries insisted on taking me to lunch. "Your father's an idiot," she said bluntly over her Caesar salad. "I've been in commercial real estate for 30 years, and you're one of the sharpest people I've worked with. If you ever decide to go independent, call me. If you ever decide to go independent." The words followed me home that night as I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxes and the strange emptiness that comes with closing one door before another has opened. I pulled out my laptop and began typing. Business plan. Executive summary. Financial projections. By 3 a.m., I had the skeleton of something that might possibly work. Mitchell Property Solutions. My own company. My own rules. My own salary structure based on merit rather than gender. The next morning, I filed my business license. 3 days later, I signed my first lease agreement for a small office space downtown. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a reception area, but it was mine. And that laugh, Dad's dismissive laugh when I told him I was quitting, it became the soundtrack to my motivation. Every time I doubted myself, every time the fear crept in, I heard that sound and remembered exactly why I was doing this. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's getting ahead. Have you ever experienced something that completely changed your perspective on family? Drop a comment about your turning point below. Starting a business with limited capital and unlimited determination turns out to be equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. My savings account, once a source of pride, suddenly looked pathetically small when viewed as startup capital. But pride, I was learning, is expensive. Independence, apparently, is priceless. My new office came furnished with exactly nothing, which meant I spent my first week turning budget shopping into an art form. Used desk from a consignment store, a chair that had seen better days but still rolled, and a coffee maker that would prove to be my most essential piece of equipment. The reception area remained empty. Hiring staff was a luxury I couldn't yet afford. The first month was humbling in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd gone from managing million-dollar portfolios to personally answering every phone call, handling my own filing, and discovering that business insurance is both absolutely necessary and absolutely expensive. But I was free. Free from family expectations, from being undervalued, from watching my brothers coast on privilege while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Some mornings, I'd arrive at my empty office, make coffee in my single-cup machine, and just smile at the quiet. My business plan was simple: provide superior property management services to small and medium-sized commercial clients. The ones too small for the big firms to care about, too large for individual landlords to handle effectively. My former family business had always chased the massive contracts, leaving a whole segment of the market underserved. Finding those first clients required more creativity than I'd anticipated. I spent weeks researching properties, cold calling building owners, and attending every networking event I could find. My elevator pitch became refined through repetition, personalized service, responsive communication, and transparent pricing. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Remember Mrs. Patterson, who owned the small office complex where I'd rented space? She'd been managing her properties herself for 15 years, and the stress was showing. "Clara, honey," she said one afternoon when I stopped by to pay rent, "you mentioned you do property management. I've got 3 buildings, and I'm drowning in maintenance requests and tenant complaints. What would something like that cost?" My first client. The contract wasn't large, 3 small office buildings with a total of 20 units. But it was real. Mrs. Patterson became my proof of concept, the foundation that would prove my business model could work. Within 2 weeks, I'd resolved a plumbing issue that had been ongoing for 6 months, negotiated better rates with her cleaning service, and implemented an online portal for tenants to submit maintenance requests. Mrs. Patterson was so pleased she recommended me to 2 other small property owners she knew. By month 3, I had 6 buildings under management and enough steady income to cover my overhead with a small profit left over. Nothing fancy, but sustainable. More importantly, I was building a reputation based on responsiveness and results. The work itself felt different when it was mine. Every satisfied client was personal validation. Every problem solved was evidence that I'd made the right choice. When tenant complaints were resolved quickly, when maintenance issues were handled efficiently, when properties stayed fully occupied. These weren't just business successes. They were proof that competence really could speak louder than connections. I established systems for everything: client communication protocols, maintenance vendor relationships, financial reporting procedures, everything my former family business did, but scaled appropriately and executed with precision. The difference was that now, when something worked well, I knew it was because of my efforts. When problems arose, I fixed them myself instead of watching someone else take credit. The loneliness was real, though. 6 years of working alongside colleagues had left me unprepared for the isolation of solo entrepreneurship. Some days, the only conversation I had was with Mrs. Patterson when she called with questions, or with maintenance technicians coordinating repairs. But slowly, I began to find my rhythm. Early mornings planning the day's activities, site visits to check on properties and meet with tenants, afternoons handling paperwork and vendor communications, evenings reviewing financials and planning for growth. 3 months in, I received a call that made me pause. Mitchell Property Solutions. This is Clara. Clara? It's Sandra from Mitchell and Associates. My stomach dropped. Hi, Sandra. How's everything going? Well, that's actually why I'm calling. Her voice was carefully professional, but I could hear stress underneath. We've had some challenges with the Morrison account since you left. Mr. Morrison specifically asked if we could recommend another management company. I know this is awkward, but would you be interested in a referral? I stared at the wall of my small office, processing the implications. Morrison Industries, my former client, the account Jake had inherited, was looking for new representation. Sandra, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm not sure that would be appropriate. There might be conflict of interest issues. Actually, they terminated their contract with us 2 weeks ago. Mr. Morrison said the service quality had declined significantly, and they needed someone who understood their specific requirements. After 4 years of managing their account, building relationships with their facilities team, and learning every quirk of their operation, I definitely understood their requirements. I'd be interested in speaking with them, I heard myself saying. Great. I'll have Mr. Morrison's office contact you directly. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at my phone. My first major client, potentially returning to me not through family connections or inherited relationships, but because they valued the quality of work I provided. The irony was delicious. Dad's question echoed in my mind. Who's going to hire you? Well, Dad, turns out my former clients were lining up to hire me, and they were willing to pay market rates for competent service. The Morrison Industries contract changed everything. Not just financially, though the retainer was more than I'd made in 3 months with my smaller clients. It changed how I saw myself as a business owner. This wasn't charity or sympathy from former colleagues. This was a major commercial client choosing my services based on merit. The transition meeting with Morrison's facilities director was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I'd worked with Janet Morrison for 4 years, developing mutual respect that had made my job easier and their operations smoother. But sitting in their conference room as the owner of my own company felt surreal. Clara, I'm going to be direct, Janet began. The service we've received from Mitchell and Associates since you left has been inconsistent at best. Maintenance requests that used to be handled within hours are now taking days. Communication has become sporadic. We need reliability, and frankly, we need someone who understands our operation. I nodded, pulling out my presentation materials. I understand completely. Let me walk you through what Mitchell Property Solutions can offer. For the next hour, I outlined my service philosophy, response protocols, and pricing structure. Everything I'd learned about their operation, combined with the systems I'd developed for my smaller clients, scaled up to meet their requirements. This sounds exactly like what we had before, Janet said with a slight smile. Which makes sense, since you're the one who developed those systems. The contract was signed that afternoon. Morrison Industries became my anchor client, providing steady revenue and industry credibility that opened doors to other opportunities. Within weeks, word began spreading through the commercial real estate community. Clara Mitchell, formerly of Mitchell and Associates, was running her own operation and delivering results. The networking events I'd attended as a small, unknown entrepreneur became more productive. People returned my calls. Referrals started coming in. The best part? Clients were seeking me out through word-of-mouth recommendations. No cold calls needed when reputation travels faster than business cards in our tight-knit industry. By month 6, I'd hired my first employee. Sarah Chen, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration and enough enthusiasm to power a small city. Having someone to handle administrative tasks freed me to focus on client relationships and business development. It's amazing how much more efficiently this place runs compared to my internship at a big firm, Sarah observed during her second week. Everyone knew what they were supposed to do, but nobody seemed to care about quality. Sarah's comment reminded me why I'd started this business. Not just to escape family discrimination, but to create something better. A company where competence was rewarded, where excellence was the standard rather than the exception, where success was measured by results rather than politics. The growth was steady but not overwhelming. I was careful not to take on more than we could handle excellently. Each new client became a reference for the next. Each successfully managed property enhanced our reputation. But the most satisfying moments came when former colleagues would call with questions. Jake, struggling with a complex lease negotiation. Ryan, dealing with a difficult tenant situation. Even Sandra from HR, asking for advice on business insurance for a side consulting venture. I helped them all, not out of bitterness or superiority, but because competent people helping each other is how business should work. The contrast between my new professional relationships and my family dynamic became starker with each interaction. My parents invited me to Sunday dinner regularly, conversations that invariably turned to questions about my little business. Mom worried about my financial security. Dad made suggestions about potential clients I should pursue. Both seemed to assume that my venture was temporary, a phase I'd outgrow before returning to the family fold. You know, Clara, if you ever want to come back to Mitchell and Associates, there would always be a place for you, Dad said during one particularly awkward dinner. Your brothers could use some support with the operations side. Support with the operations side. Translation. I could return to my previous role as the person who made them look competent while they collected the credit and larger salaries. I'm happy where I am, I replied evenly. But is it sustainable? Mom asked with genuine concern. Running your own business is so risky, honey. What happens if you lose a major client? What happens if you lose a major client? The question revealed how little they understood about what I'd built. Diversified revenue streams, strong client relationships based on performance, operational systems that could scale up or down based on demand. My business was actually less risky than depending on family benevolence for career advancement. The same thing that happens to any business, I answered. You adapt, find new opportunities, and keep moving forward. By month 8, Mitchell Property Solutions was managing 12 properties with a total value of over $50 million. Sarah had been joined by Tom, an experienced maintenance coordinator I'd recruited from a larger firm who was tired of bureaucratic inefficiency. We were becoming a real company, not just Clara with some clients, but a team delivering consistent, high-quality service to a growing client base. The office that had once felt cavernous with just me was now properly occupied, with enough activity to justify the reception area I'd finally furnished. But the most meaningful indicator of success came from an unexpected source. Clara, I've been thinking about what you're building here, Mrs. Patterson said during one of our monthly check-ins. You started with nothing except knowledge and work ethic. Now look at this place. Your family doesn't know what they lost when they let you go. Let me go. As if my departure had been their decision rather than mine. But she was right about one thing. They had no idea what they'd lost. And I was just getting started. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing lease agreements for a new client. Sarah knocked on my office door with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Clara? There's a gentleman online too who says he's from Blackstone Properties. He's asking to speak with you directly about management services. Blackstone Properties, one of my former family business's largest clients, representing a portfolio worth over $200 million. I'd managed their account for 3 years, building relationships throughout their organization and handling some of their most complex issues. I picked up the phone with careful professionalism. This is Clara Mitchell. Clara, this is David Blackstone. I hope you remember me from our previous work together. Remember him? He was one of the most demanding but fair clients I'd ever worked with. Someone who valued competence above everything else and had zero tolerance for excuses. Of course, Mr. Blackstone. How can I help you? I'll be direct. We're reviewing our current property management arrangements. And frankly, we're not satisfied with the service we've been receiving from Mitchell and Associates since you left. I understand you're running your own operation now. My pulse quickened. Blackstone Properties would be the largest client Mitchell Property Solutions had ever pursued. It would also mean directly competing with my family's business for their most valuable account. I am. Mitchell Property Solutions has been operating for 8 months now, and we're selectively taking on new clients whose needs align with our service capabilities. I'd like to discuss those capabilities with you. Are you available for lunch tomorrow? The meeting with David Blackstone felt like a validation of everything I'd built. Over 2 hours at downtown's most expensive restaurant, he outlined his frustrations with my former family business with brutal honesty. Response times have tripled, he said, cutting into his steak with precise movements. Maintenance issues that you used to resolve in hours are now taking days to even acknowledge. When I call with concerns, I get shuffled between your brothers and never feel like anyone's actually handling my problems. I listened without commenting on my family's shortcomings. Professional discretion demanded neutrality, even when hearing about failures I could have predicted. Tell me about your current capacity, he continued. Blackstone Properties would represent significant growth for your operation. Can you handle it? The honest answer was that it would stretch us considerably. But I'd learned that growth without quality was worthless, and I wasn't about to promise what I couldn't deliver. Mr. Blackstone, your portfolio would require us to expand our team and systems significantly. I'd want to implement a transition plan that maintains service quality throughout the changeover. That means starting with a portion of your properties and gradually taking on additional buildings as we demonstrate our capabilities. He smiled. That's exactly the kind of realistic planning I haven't heard from a management company in months. Most firms promise everything immediately and deliver nothing consistently. Consistency is our competitive advantage, I replied. We work with clients who value reliability over promises. By the end of lunch, we'd outlined a preliminary agreement. Blackstone would transition 4 of their smaller properties to Mitchell Property Solutions as a trial period. If our performance met their standards, they'd consider moving their entire portfolio. 4 properties, not their whole portfolio, but enough to double my company's revenue overnight. More importantly, it was Blackstone Properties choosing my services based on our track record, not family connections or inherited relationships. The conversation I'd been dreading came that evening. Mom called just as I was finishing dinner, her voice bright with forced casualness. Clara, honey, your father heard an interesting rumor today. Something about Blackstone Properties considering other management companies. Word traveled fast in our industry. I had lunch with David Blackstone today, I confirmed. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, carefully, are you considering working with them? Mom, they're considering working with me. There's a difference. But Clara, that's one of our biggest clients. Doesn't that put you in conflict with the family business? The family business. Not Dad's business or Mitchell and Associates, but specifically the family business. As if my departure hadn't already resolved any question about my role in the family's commercial interests. No conflict, I said evenly. I'm running my own company, serving clients who choose to work with us. If those clients prefer our services to the competition, that's market dynamics. The competition? Her voice rose slightly. Clara, we're your family. And there it was. The assumption that family loyalty meant professional sacrifice, that I should limit my business growth to avoid competing with people who'd discriminated against me for years. Yes, you are my family, but Mitchell and Associates is my former employer. In business, those are different relationships. Mom was quiet for a long moment. Your father isn't going to be happy about this. Dad's happiness isn't my primary concern anymore, I replied gently. My business performance is. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment considering the magnitude of what was happening. 8 months ago, I'd been a dismissed employee earning half what my brothers made while doing twice the work. Now, major clients were seeking out my services, choosing my company over my former family business based on results rather than relationships. The Blackstone contract would require hiring additional staff, upgrading our systems, and expanding our office space. Growth that I'd have to manage carefully to maintain the quality standards that had earned us this opportunity. But most importantly, it was proof that competence really could speak louder than connections. That building something based on merit rather than politics was not only possible, but profitable. Monday morning, I would call David Blackstone and accept his proposal. Mitchell Property Solutions would take on its biggest challenge yet, competing directly with the company that had undervalued me for years. And I was ready for it. The next few months would test everything I'd learned about business, about myself, and about what happens when you stop accepting less than your worth. But that's a story for another time. For now, it was enough to know that the girl Dad laughed at for thinking she could succeed on her own was about to become his biggest competitor. What do you think will happen next? Will Clara's family business fight back? Or will more clients follow Blackstone's lead? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. The first domino fell 3 weeks after I signed the Blackstone contract. Tom knocked on my office door with a grin that meant either very good news or very interesting news. Clara, you're not going to believe this. Richardson Development just called. They want to schedule a meeting about transferring their property management services to us. Richardson Development, another one of Mitchell and Associates' major clients, with a portfolio of mixed-use buildings downtown. I'd managed their account for 2 years before leaving, working directly with their facilities director to streamline operations and reduce costs. Did they say why they're considering a change? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Something about declining service quality and poor communication. They specifically asked if you were the same Clara who used to handle their account at Mitchell & Associates. Of course they did, because when you've built real relationships with clients based on competence and reliability, they tend to follow that competence wherever it goes. The meeting with Richardson's team was scheduled for Friday. By Wednesday, Sarah had fielded 2 more similar calls. Patterson Holdings, a smaller firm with 4 office buildings. Heritage Properties, which owned several retail complexes I'd helped lease up from nearly empty to fully occupied. "It's like a migration," Sarah observed, updating our client prospect list. "All your former clients are calling within the same week." Word travels fast in commercial real estate. When major clients start evaluating their service providers, other companies notice. When those same clients start mentioning specific individuals they want to work with, patterns emerge. The Richardson meeting went exactly as I'd expected. Professional, straightforward, focused on service capabilities and transition planning. No drama, no emotional appeals, just business people making business decisions. "We've worked with Mitchell & Associates for 5 years," Richardson's facilities director explained. "For the first 3, when you were handling our account, everything ran smoothly. Since you left, we've had maintenance delays, communication gaps, and what feels like a general lack of attention to our specific needs." I nodded diplomatically. "What specific service improvements are you looking for in a new management company?" "Honestly, we want what we used to have. Responsive communication, proactive maintenance scheduling, and someone who understands our operations well enough to anticipate problems before they become emergencies." By the end of the meeting, Richardson Development had agreed to transition their entire portfolio to Mitchell Property Solutions. Not a trial period like Blackstone, but a complete changeover based on their confidence in our capabilities. Patterson Holdings signed the following week. Heritage Properties the week after that. Each new client meant the same conversation with Tom and Sarah about capacity management, staffing needs, and operational scaling. We were growing faster than I'd projected, but carefully enough to maintain quality standards. The growth also meant something else. Mitchell & Associates was losing clients. Not just any clients, but their most profitable, longest-term accounts. The ones I'd personally developed and maintained. I tried not to think about the conversations happening in Dad's office, the scrambling to understand why established clients were suddenly terminating contracts, the realization that their best accounts had been held together by relationships I'd built, rather than institutional loyalty. But honestly, a small part of me was curious about how they were handling the pressure. That curiosity was satisfied when Jake called my office directly. "Clara, we need to talk." No pleasantries, no small talk. Just straight to business, which was unusual for Jake. "About what?" "About what you're doing to our clients." "What I'm doing to our clients." The phrasing was perfect, as if I was actively stealing rather than simply existing as an alternative when clients became dissatisfied with their current service. "Jake, I'm running my business. If former clients choose to work with us, that's their decision to make." "Come on, Clara." "Richardson?" "Patterson Heritage? Those are all accounts you used to manage. This isn't coincidence." He was right, of course. It wasn't coincidence. It was the natural result of clients valuing competent service over family loyalty. "What exactly are you suggesting I do?" I asked. "Turn away clients who want to work with us?" "I'm suggesting you consider the impact this is having on the family business." The family business. Again with that phrase, as if my career decisions should be governed by protecting Dad's profit margins. "Jake, when I asked for equal pay for equal work, what was I told?" Silence on the other end of the line. "I was told that business is business, remember?" "Well, this is business. If Mitchell & Associates is losing clients, maybe the solution is improving service quality rather than asking competitors to limit their growth." Dad's not happy about this. Dad's happiness hasn't been my responsibility since he laughed at the idea that anyone would hire me. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked around my office. 6 months ago, this space had felt enormous with just me rattling around in it. Now it was bustling with activity, phone calls, client meetings, and the productive energy of a growing business. The irony was beautiful. Dad had asked who would hire me, dismissing my value entirely. Instead of finding someone to hire me, I'd created something where clients were specifically seeking out my services, willing to leave established relationships to work with the company I'd built. But I also knew this couldn't continue indefinitely without consequences. Each client that moved from Mitchell & Associates to my company was revenue directly transferred from my family's business to mine. Eventually, that would force a conversation that went beyond Jake's diplomatic phone calls. The question was whether that conversation would happen in a conference room or around a dinner table. And honestly, I wasn't sure which would be worse. The industry newsletter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Tom brought it directly to my office with the expression that mixed amusement with concern. "Clara, you might want to see the company updates section." I scanned the page until I found it. Mitchell and Associates restructures operations following client portfolio changes. The article was professionally written but couldn't hide the underlying reality. 3 major client departures in 6 weeks. Staff reductions, scaled back expansion plans. Restructures operations, I read aloud. That's a diplomatic way of saying scrambling to stop the bleeding. The article didn't mention where those former clients had gone, but everyone in the industry would connect the dots. Clara Mitchell leaves the family business, starts her own company, and suddenly Mitchell and Associates is restructuring, while her former clients migrate to Mitchell Property Solutions. My phone rang within an hour of the newsletter's distribution. "Clara, this is David Blackstone. I've been hearing interesting things about your growth." "Good things, I hope." "Very good. Richardson Development speaks highly of your transition management, and I've heard similar feedback from other clients. I'm ready to discuss moving our full portfolio to Mitchell Property Solutions." The full Blackstone portfolio. 12 buildings, $200 million in managed assets, and enough management fees to triple my company's revenue. It would also make Mitchell Property Solutions one of the largest independent property management firms in the city. That's a significant decision, Mr. Blackstone. What's driving the urgency? Frankly, we've been testing your capabilities with the 4 properties you're currently managing, and the performance difference is dramatic. Maintenance response times, tenant satisfaction scores, financial reporting quality, everything's improved. We want that level of service across our entire operation. The contract signing was scheduled for Friday. By Thursday, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from other property owners who'd heard about Blackstone's decision. Word was spreading that Clara Mitchell's company was where serious clients went for serious service. That evening, Mom called. "Clara, honey, we need to talk. Can you come to dinner Sunday?" Sunday family dinners had become awkward affairs since I'd started my business. Careful conversations that avoided mentioning clients, growth, or anything that might highlight the contrast between my success and Mitchell and Associates' struggles. "Is there something specific you want to discuss?" I asked. "Your father has some thoughts about the current situation." The current situation. Code for Dad's finally ready to acknowledge that his dismissive attitude toward my capabilities might have been miscalculated. Sunday dinner was tense from the moment I walked in. Dad was already seated at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. Jake and Ryan were there too, which suggested this was less family dinner and more business meeting disguised as family time. "Clara," Dad began after we'd finished the obligatory small talk, "I think there's been some miscommunication about your business activities." Miscommunication. As if my building a successful company was somehow a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate choice. "What kind of miscommunication?" I asked. "Well, it seems like there might be some confusion in the market about your relationship to Mitchell and Associates. Some clients might think you're representing our interests when you're actually competing with us." I set down my fork and looked at him directly. "Dad, there's no confusion. My business cards clearly state Mitchell Property Solutions. My contracts explicitly identify me as an independent service provider. Every client interaction I have is transparently separate from Mitchell and Associates." "But you're using relationships you developed while working for us," Jake interjected. "I'm using professional relationships I developed through competent service delivery. Those relationships exist because clients trust my work, not because they belong to any company." Ryan leaned forward. "Come on, Clara. You have to admit this looks bad. Former family employee starts competing business. Takes away major clients? People are talking. People are talking. The horror of industry gossip about a woman succeeding independently. Ryan, what exactly do you think I should do? Limit my business growth to protect your comfort level?" "We think," Dad said carefully, "that there might be an opportunity to bring you back. Senior vice president position, significant salary increase, equity stake in the company. You could lead the operations division and have real authority over service delivery." For a moment, I was genuinely speechless. After everything, the discrimination, the dismissal, the public humiliation, they wanted to offer me a job. Not an apology, not recognition of wrongdoing, but employment, as if that's all I'd ever wanted. "Let me understand this correctly," I said slowly. "You want me to dissolve my successful business, abandon my clients, and return to work for you in exchange for what should have been offered years ago? It's a generous offer." "Clara," Mom said gently, "and it would keep everything in the family. Keep everything in the family." There it was again. The assumption that family loyalty should override professional judgment and personal dignity. "No," I said quietly. Dad's eyebrows rose. "No to which part?" "No to all of it. I'm not dissolving my business. I'm not abandoning clients who trust me. And I'm not returning to work for people who fundamentally don't respect my capabilities. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Jake spoke. So you're going to keep competing with us? Keep taking our clients? I'm going to keep serving clients who choose to work with us. If that's competition, then yes, I'm going to keep competing, and I'm going to keep winning. I stood up from the table. Thanks for dinner, Mom. It was enlightening, as always. As I walked to my car, I could hear raised voices from inside the house. The conversation I'd just ended was apparently continuing without me. But that was fine. I had my own business to run, my own clients to serve, and my own success to build. And unlike family dinners, business was going beautifully. December arrived with both holiday decorations and an unexpected invitation. The annual Commercial Real Estate Excellence Awards dinner was the industry's biggest networking event. And this year, Mitchell Property Solutions had been nominated for Rising Company of the Year. Nominated for an award after less than a year in business. I stared at the invitation, remembering last year's ceremony when I'd attended as Dad's employee, watching from the back of the room while established firms received recognition. This year, I'd be seated at the nominees' table. The irony was delicious, but the timing was complicated. The awards dinner was scheduled for December 15th, the same week the industry would publish its year-end client satisfaction survey. Mitchell Property Solutions had scored in the 98th percentile. Mitchell and Associates had dropped to the 72nd. Clara, do you think your family will be there? Sarah asked, helping me review the seating chart that had arrived with our invitation. Probably. Mitchell and Associates usually buys a table. Will that be awkward? Awkward didn't begin to cover it. Being publicly recognized for business excellence while my former family business struggled with client retention wasn't just awkward, it was justice served with a side of professional validation. The week before the awards dinner brought another development I hadn't anticipated. Tom handed me a message slip with Dad's direct office number written on it. He called personally, asked you to call back when convenient. Dad never called anyone personally. He had assistants for that. This was either very good news or very bad news. Clara? His voice was carefully controlled when I returned the call. I was wondering if we could have lunch this week. Just the two of us. Is there something specific you want to discuss? I think it's time we had an honest conversation about where things stand. Lunch was scheduled at the same restaurant where I'd met David Blackstone months earlier. Dad arrived precisely on time, looking older than I'd noticed during our family dinners. The stress of losing major clients was apparently taking its toll. You look well, he began after we'd ordered. Business seems to be treating you kindly. It is. We're having a good year. He nodded, stirring his coffee with unnecessary attention. I've been thinking about our conversation at Sunday dinner. About the offer we made. Dad, my position hasn't changed. I'm not interested in working for Mitchell and Associates again. I know, and I'm beginning to understand why. This was unexpected. Dad didn't usually engage in self-reflection, especially about business decisions. I may have underestimated your capabilities, he continued carefully. The success you've built independently demonstrates skills I perhaps didn't fully appreciate when you were working for us. Perhaps didn't fully appreciate. The closest thing to an acknowledgement of error I was likely to hear. And I'm wondering if there might be room for some kind of collaboration. Not employment, but partnership. Mitchell and Associates could handle the large institutional clients, and your company could manage the mid-market accounts. We could refer clients back and forth, share resources, maybe even coordinate on larger projects. I studied his face, looking for the angle I knew had to be there. Dad didn't propose partnerships from generosity. He proposed them from necessity. What would be the structure of this partnership? I asked. We could start informally, cross-referrals when appropriate, maybe some joint marketing efforts. Eventually, if it worked well, we could explore more formal arrangements. Cross-referrals when appropriate. Translation. When Mitchell and Associates couldn't handle the workload or wanted to dump difficult clients, they'd send them to me. When I developed successful relationships with growing companies, I'd refer them back to the family business. Dad, what you're describing isn't partnership. It's outsourcing. You want me to handle the challenging work while you keep the profitable relationships. His jaw tightened slightly. That's not what I'm suggesting, isn't it? You want informal referrals that benefit Mitchell and Associates, with the possibility of more formal arrangements if I prove useful enough. What exactly would I gain from this relationship? You'd gain family support, access to our resources and client network. Family support. The thing that had been conspicuously absent when I was actually part of the family business. I already have access to clients who value my services. I've built my own resources. And family support? I paused, choosing my words carefully. Family support would have been useful a year ago, when I was earning half what my brothers made for doing twice the work. Dad was quiet for a long moment. Clara, I know we handled some things poorly when you were working for us, but can't we move past that? Focus on what's best for everyone? What's best for everyone? Always the family refrain when individual success threatened collective comfort. Dad, what's best for me is continuing to build my own business, serving clients who choose my services based on merit, and proving every day that the woman who only spends money was actually the most valuable asset Mitchell and Associates ever had. His face flushed slightly. I'd quoted his words back to him, and we both knew it. I didn't mean it that way. Yes, you did. And that's why there won't be any partnership, collaboration, or cross-referrals. Because fundamentally, you still don't understand what you lost when you let me walk out of that office. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my untouched meal. I'll see you at the awards dinner, Dad. Good luck with your restructuring. As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not for the struggling business, but for the man who'd had excellence working alongside him for years and had been too blinded by prejudice to recognize it until it was too late. But pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had a business to run and an award to win. The industry newsletter that arrived the Monday after my lunch with Dad contained a small item that made Sarah choke on her coffee. Mitchell and Associates explores strategic options following market changes. Strategic options, she read aloud. That's business speak for we're in trouble and considering selling. The thought of my family business being sold was surreal. Dad had built Mitchell and Associates from nothing, and for 30 years it had been his identity as much as his livelihood. Now, strategic options were being explored because clients preferred working with the daughter he'd dismissed as incompetent. The awards dinner was 3 days away, and the pre-event publicity was generating more attention than I'd anticipated. The local business journal ran a feature about emerging companies reshaping commercial real estate, with Mitchell Property Solutions prominently featured. The article included a photo of me in my office, surrounded by the visible evidence of rapid growth. That evening, Mom called. Clara, I saw the article in the business journal. You look very professional. Thank you. Your father's having a difficult time with all of this. The business has been struggling since you left, and now with the awards dinner coming up. I waited for her to finish, but she seemed to be searching for words. Mom, what is it you want me to do? I don't know. Maybe not attend? Or if you do attend, maybe sit with the family? Show some unity during a challenging time? Show some unity. Pretend that my success hadn't come at the expense of their failures. Pretend that we were all on the same team when they'd made it clear I wasn't even welcome on their roster. Mom, I'm nominated for an award based on the business I built after being told I was worthless. I'm not hiding that achievement to spare Dad's feelings. It just looks bad, honey, like you're celebrating our struggles. I'm not celebrating your struggles. I'm celebrating my success. There's a difference. Is there? Really? The question hung in the air. Was there a difference between celebrating my achievements and celebrating their failures? When my success was built partly on clients who'd left their business because of poor service, was I celebrating both simultaneously? Yes, Mom, there is a difference. I didn't cause Mitchell and Associates to lose clients. I didn't force them to provide poor service. I simply offered an alternative when clients became dissatisfied. That's business competition, not family betrayal. Your brothers don't see it that way. My brothers are welcome to see it however they choose. But their perspective doesn't change reality. The awards dinner was held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, the same venue where I'd attended dozens of industry events as a Mitchell and Associates representative. This time, I walked in as the owner of Mitchell Property Solutions, wearing a navy suit that had cost more than my monthly salary from the family business. The nominee reception was in full swing when I arrived. Congratulations from industry colleagues who'd watched my rapid rise with professional appreciation, networking conversations with potential clients who'd heard about my services, recognition from peers who valued competence above connections, and across the room, the Mitchell and Associates table. Dad in his standard black tuxedo, looking distinguished but tired. Mom beside him, dressed elegantly but wearing the strained expression of someone attending a funeral. Jake and Ryan flanking them, both checking their phones more than engaging in conversation. When the dinner program began, I was seated at the Rising Company nominees table, 6 companies being recognized for outstanding growth and service excellence. The presenter read our achievements: client growth percentages, satisfaction scores, industry impact measures. Mitchell Property Solutions, the presenter announced, achieved 340% client growth, 98% satisfaction ratings, and successfully transitioned over $400 million in managed assets within their first operational year. Polite applause from most of the room, stony silence from Table 12. When they announced Rising Company of the Year, Mitchell Property Solutions, The applause was genuine and sustained. I stood to accept the award, a crystal plaque recognizing excellence in service delivery and business growth. At the podium, looking out over 500 industry professionals, I could see my family's table clearly. Dad's face was carefully neutral. Mom was clapping politely. Jake and Ryan were studying their dinner plates with unusual intensity. "Thank you for this recognition," I began. "Mitchell Property Solutions exists because we believe competence should drive client relationships, not connections. We believe excellence should be rewarded, not overlooked. And we believe that sometimes the most successful path forward requires the courage to step away from the familiar and build something better." The speech was brief and professional. No family references, no personal vindication, just business principles delivered to business professionals. But everyone in that room understood the subtext. After the ceremony, industry colleagues surrounded our table with congratulations and business cards, potential clients expressing interest in our services, professional recognition from peers who valued results above relationships. As the evening wound down, I found myself face-to-face with Dad in the hotel lobby. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "That was a significant achievement. Thank you. I hope you know that I'm proud of what you've built, even if the circumstances have been difficult for our family." Proud, the word I'd wanted to hear for years, finally offered when it no longer mattered. "Dad, I appreciate that. But pride isn't the same as respect, and respect isn't the same as equality. If you'd been proud of my work when I was part of your company, we might have avoided all of this." He nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But Clara, what happens now? This can't continue indefinitely. The competition between our companies is tearing the family apart." "The competition isn't tearing the family apart. The family fell apart when you decided my gender made me less valuable than my brothers. The business competition is just making that visible." It was the most honest conversation we'd had since that day in his office when he'd laughed at my resignation. "So where does this leave us?" he asked. "It leaves us as family members who work for different companies. Whether that works depends on whether you can accept that I'm never coming back to work for you, and I'm never going to limit my success to protect your comfort." As I walked to my car, award in hand, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The family dynamics that had defined my life for 28 years were permanently changed. There would be no reconciliation that restored the old relationships, no compromise that satisfied everyone. But there would be Christmas dinner in 2 weeks, and somehow we'd all have to navigate that conversation without the comfortable fiction that we were still the happy Mitchell family. This was going to be interesting. Christmas Eve arrived with an invitation that felt more like a diplomatic summons than a family gathering. Mom had called 3 times in 2 weeks, each conversation carefully dancing around the underlying tension while insisting that Christmas should be about family, not business. I almost didn't go. The thought of sitting around the dinner table pretending everything was normal while my award sat on my apartment mantel felt exhausting, but staying away would generate its own drama. And honestly, I was curious to see how they'd handle the elephant that had taken up permanent residence in every family interaction. The house looked exactly the same as it had for 28 Christmases. Mom's elaborate decorations, Dad's expensive scotch on the sideboard, the family photos arranged on the mantel where my childhood face gradually disappeared behind my brother's achievements. The only difference was the tension that seemed to vibrate in the air like a tuning fork. "Clara, honey, you look wonderful," Mom said, air kissing my cheek with the careful enthusiasm of someone determined to maintain normalcy through pure force of will. Jake and Ryan were already there, standing by the fireplace with drinks and expressions that suggested they'd been discussing strategy before my arrival. Dad emerged from his study wearing his host smile, the one he used for business dinners with difficult clients. "Clara, good to see you. Merry Christmas." "Dad." Dinner conversation was a masterclass in avoiding obvious topics. Mom asked about my apartment. Jake mentioned his latest vacation plans. Ryan discussed the weather with unusual passion. Everyone carefully avoided mentioning business, awards, clients, or anything that might acknowledge the reality of our situation. It might have worked if wine hadn't loosened tongues and artificial pleasantness hadn't eventually exhausted itself. "So, Clara," Jake said during dessert, his voice carrying the careful casualness of someone who'd been rehearsing a line, "are you planning any major changes for the new year?" "Just continued growth. We're looking at expanding our service offerings." "Expanding?" Ryan's eyebrows lifted. "How much bigger can you realistically get?" There it was, the question they'd all been dancing around. How much bigger could my success become before it completely overshadowed their struggles? "Big enough to serve clients who value quality service," I replied evenly. Dad set down his wine glass. "Clara, I think we need to discuss this situation openly. This family can't continue with this level of professional conflict." "What conflict?" I asked. "I run my business, you run yours. That's not conflict. That's competition. It's the same thing when it's family, Mom interjected. When you succeed at our expense, it hurts everyone. At our expense. As if my success was stolen from them rather than earned through competence they'd refuse to acknowledge. Mom, I didn't succeed at your expense. I succeeded despite your limitations. There's a difference. The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Our limitations? Dad's voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the anger building behind his eyes. Yes, your limitations. The limitation of assuming gender determines capability. The limitation of valuing loyalty over competence. The limitation of believing family relationships should override fair business practices. Jake leaned forward. Clara, that's not fair. We never said gender Really? Then why was I earning $42,000 while you made $95,000 for managing fewer accounts less effectively? What factor other than gender would explain that discrepancy? Experience, Ryan said quickly. Tenure, responsibilities. Bullshit. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was done with diplomatic language. I had more client contact, higher satisfaction scores, and better retention rates than both of you combined. The only difference was that you're men, and I'm not. Dad's face was flushed now. Clara, I won't tolerate that language or those accusations in my house. Your house? I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. Dad, this stopped being about your house the minute you told me I was worthless. This is about justice. This is about a woman who spent 6 years being told she was less valuable than her brothers, finally proving everyone wrong. We never said you were worthless, Mom protested. No, you said I only spend money, and that my brothers deserved higher salaries because they're men. You said no one would hire me when I quit. You laughed at the idea that I could succeed independently. How is that not calling me worthless? The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in my adult life, I had said exactly what I thought to my family without softening edges or protecting feelings. And now, I continued, now that I've built something successful, you want me to feel guilty about it. You want me to apologize for being competent. You want me to limit my growth to protect your comfort. Well, I won't do it. Dad stood up abruptly. You're being dramatic and vindictive, Clara. This isn't about gender or fairness. This is about you using family relationships to undermine our business. Family relationships? I stood too, my voice rising to match his. What family relationships? The ones where you underpaid me for years? The ones where you dismissed my contributions? The ones where you laughed at my potential? Those family relationships? You're destroying this family, he said, his voice sharp with frustration. No, Dad. I'm just refusing to pretend that being family excuses discrimination. I'm refusing to sacrifice my success for your pride. And I'm refusing to apologize for being better at this business than you ever imagined. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Everyone was staring at me, and for a moment, I saw myself through their eyes. The daughter who'd finally stopped being grateful for scraps and started demanding what she deserved. I think, I said quietly, it's time for me to go. I gathered my coat and purse while the family sat in stunned silence. At the door, I turned back one last time. Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope next year is better for all of us. As I drove home through empty streets decorated with holiday lights, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For 28 years, I'd carried the weight of their expectations and limitations. Tonight, I'd finally set it down. Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. January brought changes I hadn't anticipated. The industry newsletter that arrived on my desk the second week of the new year contained an announcement that made me pause. Mitchell & Associates implements performance-based compensation structure. Performance-based compensation. After 30 years of running the company like a family legacy project, Dad was suddenly interested in measuring results. Tom knocked on my office door with a grin that suggested interesting news. Clara, you'll never guess who just called asking about employment opportunities. Who? Sandra from Mitchell & Associates. She's looking for a new position, preferably somewhere that values professional competence over family politics. Sandra, the HR director who'd sat quietly in that terrible meeting where Dad explained why my brothers deserved higher salaries. The woman who'd worked loyally for my family's business for 15 years was suddenly interested in exploring other options. What did you tell her? That we'd be happy to schedule an interview. We could use someone with her experience in HR management. The call came that afternoon. Sandra's voice was carefully professional but carried an undertone of frustration I recognized. Clara, I hope you don't mind my reaching out directly. I know this might be awkward given our history. Not awkward at all. Tom mentioned you were interested in discussing opportunities. I am. The work environment at Mitchell & Associates has become challenging. Your father has implemented some significant policy changes that are affecting staff morale. Policy changes. What kind of changes? Sandra hesitated. Performance metrics for all employees, including family members. Mandatory productivity targets. Accountability measures that weren't previously in place. It's creating a lot of tension, especially with Jake and Ryan. Dad had finally decided to run his business like a business rather than a family gift distribution system. And apparently his sons weren't adjusting well to being measured by results. How are they handling the new expectations? Not well. There have been several heated discussions about fairness and appropriate workload distribution. Ryan actually asked me if the performance requirements applied to family members equally. I almost laughed. Ryan questioning whether performance requirements should apply to him equally. The same Ryan who'd watched me work twice as hard for half the pay without ever questioning that arrangement. Sandra, if you're interested in joining Mitchell Property Solutions, I'd be happy to discuss it. We value experience, professionalism, and the ability to implement fair employment practices. The interview was scheduled for Friday. By Thursday, I'd received 2 more calls from Mitchell & Associates employees asking about opportunities. Word was spreading that Dad's new performance-focused management style wasn't popular with staff accustomed to more relaxed expectations. Sarah found the situation amusing. So your father is finally running his company the way you always thought it should be run, but now everyone's unhappy because they're not used to being accountable? Something like that. The irony is that if he'd implemented performance-based systems years ago, none of this would have been necessary, but he preferred managing through favoritism and family hierarchy. The industry newsletter from late January contained another interesting item. Mitchell & Associates posts declining revenue for 4th consecutive quarter. The article was brief and diplomatically written, but the implications were clear. While I was winning awards for business growth, my former family business was struggling to maintain market position. My phone rang that afternoon. Dad's name on the caller ID made me hesitate before answering. Clara, I think it's time we had another conversation. About what? About the future. About what's sustainable for both of our companies. The meeting was scheduled for neutral ground, a coffee shop downtown where neither of us had history. Dad arrived looking older than I'd remembered, the stress of running a struggling business evident in his posture and expression. I've been thinking about our Christmas conversation, he began after we'd ordered. You made some valid points about how we handled your compensation and career development. Valid points. Not you were right, or we discriminated against you, but valid points. And I've been implementing some changes at Mitchell & Associates. Performance-based pay scales, accountability measures, objective evaluation criteria. How's that working out? His jaw tightened slightly. It's been an adjustment. Some employees are struggling with the new expectations. Some employees. Code for Jake and Ryan. Dad, why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that I'm trying to address the issues you raised. And I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity for reconciliation. What kind of reconciliation? Perhaps you could consider returning to Mitchell & Associates under the new structure. VP of Operations, competitive salary based on performance metrics, equity stake in the company, full authority over service delivery and client relationships. For a moment, I was genuinely speechless. After everything, the awards, the success, the public recognition of my capabilities, he still thought the solution was bringing me back to work for him. Dad, do you understand what you're asking? I'm asking you to help save the family business. You're asking me to abandon the successful company I built to rescue the business that discriminated against me. You're asking me to give up my independence to solve problems your favoritism created. His face flushed. Clara, I'm trying to make things right. No, you're trying to make things profitable. There's a difference. I stood up, leaving my untouched coffee on the table. Dad, I appreciate that you're finally implementing fair employment practices, but I'm not interested in being the solution to problems you created by undervaluing me. I'm busy building something better. 6 months later, the industry newsletter carried a small announcement. Mitchell Property Solutions named Commercial Property Management Firm of the Year. The article included a photo of our team, Sandra, Tom, Sarah, and myself, standing in front of our newly expanded offices. In the same issue, buried on page 6, was another item. Mitchell & Associates sold to regional property management firm. Dad had finally explored those strategic options to their logical conclusion. I felt no satisfaction in their failure, but I felt enormous satisfaction in my success. The woman who only spent money had built something valuable, sustainable, and entirely her own. The family business that had dismissed my capabilities was gone, but the company I'd created was thriving. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's getting ahead and staying there. 3 years later, Mitchell Property Solutions manages over $800 million in commercial assets. We employ 23 people, all compensated based on performance rather than genetics. Our client satisfaction scores consistently rank in the 99th percentile. And me? I'm still Clara Mitchell, still 31 years old, still proving every day that competence speaks louder than connections. Merit matters more than family ties. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value your worth. Because when you stop accepting less than you deserve, you discover exactly how much you're capable of achieving. And that, it turns out, is quite a lot. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when family relationships become toxic. Sometimes the people who should support us most are the ones we need to step away from to find our true potential.